All right. Well, hello world. This is CS50, and this is our first live class via Zoom in this format. Some of you have likely joined Brian and myself for office hours in recent weeks, and we'll be resuming those next week as well, so stay tuned. But this week, we thought we would try something a little different and teach a live class online, complete with audience participation. I do hope in advance you'll forgive if we can't quite call on everyone's hands who's raised today, but we will pepper the conversation with some polling questions, some verbal questions and the like, so that we can involve as many people here as possible. I'm joined, of course, by CS50's own Brian Yu. If you'd like to say hello as well, Brian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brian, also calling in from Cambridge, Massachusetts. Really good to see everyone here today.
Indeed. Hope this finds everyone well with their family and colleagues and friends. We'll proceed now to dive right into the conversation about cybersecurity. Certainly a germane topic these days, something I actually studied in some detail when I was in graduate school, so it's long been of personal interest to me. To give you a tour of how this will work, if you're relatively new to Zoom, along the bottom of your window, you'll likely see a participants window. If you click on the participants icon, you should see everyone else who's participating here today. If you click on the chat icon, which should be near that one, you should be able to chat textually with other folks who are in the room. Feel free to share URLs or answer questions. Brian and I won't really be able to keep an eye on the chat window because so many of the messages fly by so quickly, but we will use Zoom's blue hand feature that some of you have discovered already. So today is not going to be office hours for open-ended Q&A. Everything will be focused on cybersecurity. So we'll iteratively put people's hands down between questions just so that we know who is ready to answer some question. So today, keeping your laptop or desktop computer and phone secure. Let me go ahead and zoom in on one of those terms in particular, secure, because this is a term that a lot of us probably use once in a while, or perhaps even take for granted as to what it means. So what does it mean for a laptop or a desktop or a phone or really any device to be secure? Well, let's go ahead and ask a question of the group first. We are about to prompt your screen with a poll that has a couple of multiple choice possibilities. The question at hand for the whole group here is your laptop or desktop secure? And second question, is your mobile phone secure? So how would you answer that question? Go ahead and click the icon on your screen. Is your laptop or desktop secure? And is your mobile phone secure? We see some responses coming in now. We'll give everyone a few seconds in order to buzz in. A few more seconds. 75% of people here have answered the poll already. We're up to 80%, 83%. All right, we'll give folks a few more seconds. And OK, Brian, do you want to go ahead and reveal the results? All right, so you should now see on your screen the results of the poll. It looks like an answer to the question, is your laptop or desktop secure? 34% of you said yes, 20% of you said no, and 46% of you said unsure. So it's perhaps appropriate that we're all gathering here today to talk about this very topic. Meanwhile, the second question, is your mobile phone secure? Numbers are pretty similar, it seems. 31% of you said yes, 25% of you said no, and 43% of you said unsure, and a few of you don't have a mobile device too, which is quite fine. So we're going to go ahead and put this poll away and dive right into what it means then for devices to be secure. And in fact, let's go ahead and ask a few questions, because many of you seem to have an innate sense of what it means for your device to be secure. But let's try to tease this apart. By a raise of a blue digital hand, would anyone like to give us their definition of what it means for their phone or their laptop or desktop to be secure? Let's see how it is you interpreted this question. Feel free to raise your hand. And again, forgive if we can only call on a few such hands today, given the sheer number of us in the room. But let's see, who could we call on first here? What does it mean to be secure? Harsh, would you like to say hello and where you're from and what you mean by secure?
Hi, I'm Harsh. I'm from India, and I would love to tell you what secure is. In my definition of secure, I would consider a device to be secure if the information on it is private only to me and the ones I want to share it with. And not only the information, but the usability and what else I would like the device to do is exclusive to me.
Okay. I like that. So an emphasis on privacy of your data, in particular, the what it is you're storing on that device. Well, let's take one other definition from someone else on what you feel it means for your device to be secure. Let's see, whose hand to call on? Quite a few hands up in the air. How about Aditya? Where are you from and what is your answer?
Yeah, hi, I'm from India, and I believe a device can be secure when it's not vulnerable to attacks by hackers per se, and yeah, the data is fully secure and it is only accessible to me and to those I trust.
I like that. So more of a defensive definition, preventing your device from being vulnerable to attack. So I like that one as well. And let me propose that we humans do certainly have some conventions for trying to keep our devices secure and trying to keep hackers out of them. So for instance, passwords. Pretty much every one of us has one or more passwords in our life, whether it's for Zoom or your email account or some messaging app on your phone or the like. So let's consider passwords for just a moment. Do passwords keep your device is secure? Well, hopefully a password is something that only you know and not necessarily someone else. The catch is that you and I and many, many people around the world really aren't good at choosing good passwords. In fact, if we take a look at the results of a research study in 2019, as of just a few months ago, based on a whole bunch of databases and websites and applications that were hacked or compromised, security researchers have pretty good insight into just how good or bad your password is, my password is, and everyone's passwords are, because they end up appearing on the internet, unfortunately, in big data dumps that have been stolen from various websites or apps. So for instance, in 2019, the most common password among us humans was, if you can believe it, 1234556. So if your password is 1234556, you're in very bad company because so many other people on the internet are using that same password. The number 2 most common password in 2019 was slightly better, 123456789. So a longer password, but still clearly pretty guessable. Number 3 was QWERTY. QWERTY. And if you're not sure why QWERTY made the list, well, if you have a US keyboard and you look along the top row of your keys, and this might also be true in your own language, from Q to W to E to R to T to Y, on a typical US keyboard or English keyboard are the top several letters on the keyboard itself. So clearly someone's just trying to come up with a very simple heuristic for their password. Number 4 was the word password itself. So many of us apparently literally use the word password to keep track of some account security. After that was 1234567. After that was 1234567 Number 7 was only 12345. Number 8 was, adorably, I love you. Number 9 was 111111. And last on the top 10 list in 2019 was 123. So if you've seen any of your passwords on this list, it is time to change them, because suffice it to say that if you have the same password as so many other people, it's going to be all too easy for some hacker, some adversary, so to speak, to guess or try via trial and error to get into your account by just choosing these most common possible passwords. So how might an adversary do that? What does it mean to hack into an account or get into your email or some messaging app or any other app that you have a password on? Well, generally speaking, the term of art here is brute force attack. And that phrase kind of says what it means. It means a hacker will literally try to brute force their way into your account. They will try, for instance, writing a program that tries all possible passwords, and if one of them is correct, boom, they're into your account. But hackers can be smarter than that. They don't have to just try all possible passwords. You know what they could do? They could start with this top 10 list. They could literally write a program with maybe 10 if conditions, if you're familiar with programming already, and just try the top 10 passwords on your account and see if they get in. Or they can be a little more clever about it and actually write some code. And so what I thought I'd do is write some code myself, pretending for a moment to be a hacker of sorts. And what might the code look like that I write in order to hack into someone's account? Well, first and foremost, very common on phones these days, might be a 4-digit password. So 4 numbers, 0 through 9, keep you from getting into your phone or an adversary from getting into your phone unless they know the password just like you. So let me go ahead and share a different window on my screen. For those familiar, you're about to see what's called a terminal window, a black and white window in which I can write some code. And you should see now to the side exactly that. I'm going to go ahead and write a program in this window that tries to hack someone's password. I'm going to use a program called VI, but this is just a text editor. I'm going to call my program crack.py. And in crack.py, to crack a password means to figure out what it is. Let me go ahead and write some lines of code in Python. Technically, I could do this in C or C++ or C# or Java or really any language, but I'll do it in Python. And I'm going to go ahead and say from string import digits. If I'm trying to hack a 4-digit password, I'm going to need access to digits, and the string library gives me just that. From iter tools, I'm going to go ahead and import a function called product, which is going to allow me to combine all the possible digits in the world. And then I'm going to do this. For password in the product of all of those digits, and I'm going to repeat digits 4 times total, I'm going to go ahead now and print out just whatever the result is of that password. So in short, I have a for loop, which is something that's going to run again and again and again. And what this loop is going to do is try all possible 4-digit passwords. All right, I'm going to go ahead and save that. And if familiar, you'll know that in Python, you can simply run Python of the name of the file you want to run, which in my case is crack.py. And I go ahead and hit enter, and boom. I have, in a few lines of code, generated all possible 4-digit passcodes pretty trivially. And notice how fast they flew by on my screen. So you can imagine writing code that doesn't just print these things on my screen, but maybe via a cable or wirelessly tries inputting them again and again and again into your phone or into some other device. So that was pretty simple. And let's consider for a moment just how secure or insecure a 4-digit passcode is. So how do security people do this? Well, they consider if your password is 4 digits, and an adversary can just brute force their way into your account by trying all possible passwords. Well, how many possible passwords does that adversary have to try? In other words, how many 4-digit passwords are even possible in the world? If each of those 4 digits is 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9. So 0 through 9. So let's go ahead and actually ask the group here. Brian, do you mind polling the group? And let us ask you this multiple choice. How many 4-digit passwords are possible in the world? How many 4-digit passwords are possible? And again, each digit can be 0 or 1 or 2 all the way up to 9. But you only have access to 4 of those. Let's give folks a few seconds to buzz in. Again, a little window should have popped up on your screen here. Go ahead and choose your answer. If you need to do some math on paper or in a calculator, that's quite fine too. But let's see here what folks think. Looks like 70% of people have voted. We'll give folks a few more seconds. A few more seconds. All right, almost up to 80%. And let's go ahead and reveal the results, Brian. All right, it looks like a few people said 4, a few people said 40, a bunch of people said 9,999, but the most people, 57% of people, said 10,000, and a bunch of people were not sure. So let's see what the answer actually is. Let me propose that we try to break this question down, break this problem down into some very simple math, some very simple arithmetic. And indeed, this is how you go about measuring the security of a system very often. You consider, even if an adversary isn't very smart and they just try all possible passwords, well, how many passwords are they going to have to try? In other words, how long is it going to take them to potentially hack into my account? Well, with 4-digit passcodes, let's consider that each of the passwords, each of the digits can be 0 through 9, so 10 possibilities. So if the first character, first digit can be 0 through 9, that's 10 possibilities. If the second digit can be 0 through 9, that's another 10 possibilities. The third and the fourth are the same, so it's 10 times 10 times 10 times 10 gives us the total number of permutations of those digits. And now let me go ahead and reveal the math, of course, works out to be 10,000. So those of you who guessed 10,000, perfectly correct. Those of you who said 9,999, so close. But of course, if someone's password is 0000, that's going to be a possible value as well. So you do have to include that in consideration. All right, so clearly that was pretty silly and naive of me to just have a 4-digit passcode. That's not very secure on your phone, and if you have one now, consider that someone could just sit there typing in these values again and again and again. So let's do a little better. It's very common, for instance, for people not to use digits, but maybe words. They could use words instead. So let me ask this question now of the group. How might an adversary go about figuring out your password if you're using a word? And for instance, an English word. Any blue hands like to go up? How might an adversary hack into your account and therefore crack your password if it's not digits, but it's an English word, for instance? Let's see. Who would like to answer this question? Go ahead and use Zoom's blue hand feature, which is in the participants window, if you'd like to raise your hand. Inji, is it? And how do you pronounce your name and where are you from?
It's Inji. I'm from Egypt. I was guessing maybe using like a repository of the dictionary and putting that in and seeing if you attempt all of them.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's actually, I'm thrilled that you said that because in fact, guess what I came prepared with today? A really big dictionary with 140,000 English words. And in fact, let me go ahead and modify my program from before and go ahead now and edit crack.py, not to try digits, but this time let me go ahead and try all possible English words that I have in this dictionary in a file for me. I'm going to go ahead now and reopen crack.py. And this time I'm going to do the following. For word in, the result of opening a file called dictionary.txt, which I brought with me today, I'm going to read that file in Python, and I'm going to split up all of the lines based on new line endings. So there's one word per line, one word per line. And I'm going to go ahead now and do a printing of each word just so we can see what the word is. So again, you can imagine an adversary writing a program that simply tries all possible words in a dictionary and goes ahead now and runs this code. So let me go ahead and share this via the embedded window next to me now because we'll see the results fly by the screen. And I'm going to go ahead now and run, of course, Python of crack.py. And voila. So Inji, I love your idea because an adversary can clearly try using a dictionary like this as well. Unfortunately, look how fast I tried all possible 140,000 English words. So even that doesn't seem to be a very effective solution if it's all too easy for an adversary to do that. So let's try a couple of other possibilities here. Let me go ahead and share my screen a little differently here. And let me propose that we consider other possible combinations. So for instance, previously we considered 4-digit passcodes. What if we instead consider now something like 4-letter passwords? 4-letter passwords. So let me go ahead and ask the group, if we change from 4-digit passcodes to 4-letter passcodes, where each letter can be either A or B or C or Z, case insensitively, how many possible passwords could there be if we now just use a 4-letter password or passcode? Brian, could we ask the group this? So this time, let's consider something that's still short, that's not numeric, because that didn't work out very well. That's not an English word, because that didn't work out very well. So let's at least use something short and convenient, like 4 letters, but allow the user to use letters of the alphabet this time. Letters of the alphabet. All right, so we have over 50% of people have voted already. 50% of people. All right, we're up to 60, so we have more than a majority. Let's keep going. We're up to 75%, and it's looking like the answer is going to be pretty clear here. Brian, do you want to go ahead and reveal the results? And indeed, so you should see on your screen that 90% of you concluded that with 4-letter passcodes, there are 456,000 possibilities, 976. So that's clearly much bigger than 10,000. That's much bigger than 140,000. So this would already seem to be an improvement. And how do we go about thinking about this here? Well, let me propose that we consider, again, with 4-letter passwords, that's really the same as doing 26 times 26 times 26 times 26, because again, if you don't worry about uppercase or lowercase, A through Z gives you 26 possibilities. So the first digit can be 26 letters, the second can be 26 letters, the third and the fourth. And if you multiply that all out, indeed, you get 456,000, 976. All right, so that's better, but honestly, that's what, like 4 times as many possibilities as the 140,000 words I tried earlier. Doesn't feel like that's going to take more than a few seconds still to write code for. So let me go ahead and propose that we do 4-character alphanumeric passcodes. So 4 characters that are alphabetical or numeric, so A through Z, or 0 through 9. And you know what? Let's make case matter this time. So just like a lot of websites require of you, let's require that the user have a mix of uppercase and lowercase and numbers, but no punctuation. Brian, could we ask the group how much better this now might be if we use 4-character passwords instead? So how many 4-character passwords are possible? Again, if you do worry about case, uppercase and lowercase, and you do use numbers and letters. We're up to 35, 40% of people have buzzed in. Now up to 50% of folks have buzzed in. 60%, 70%. All right, we'll give folks a few more seconds. And all right, Brian, you want to go ahead and do the reveal? So folks are picking up on a pattern here, perhaps. So now 74% of you concluded that if you use 4-character alphanumeric passwords that are case sensitive, now there's as many as 14,776,336 possibilities. So why exactly is that? Well, again, even though the numbers are getting kind of big and scary, the logic is still exactly the same. Now, if you're considering letters of the alphabet, that's A through Z, so that's 26 possibilities. But if it's lowercase or uppercase A through Z, that's 26 plus 26, so that's 52. But if you also add in numbers, that's 0 through 9, so that's 10 more, so that's 26 plus 26 plus 10. So that gives you 62 possible values for each of those characters. So that's 62 times 62 times 62 times 62. And that indeed is going to give us 14 million plus. So now this is getting compelling. And in fact, let me go ahead and demonstrate just how much more compelling this is going to get with some actual code. I'm going to lay it out side by side with me this time so I can see it on my own screen as well. And I'm going to propose now with crack.py that I do the following. From string, I'm going to import what are called ASCII letters, which are A through Z, uppercase and lowercase. From itertools, a Python library, I'm going to go ahead and import that product function, which will help me combine everything again. And now I'm going to say for each password in the result of combining all of those ASCII, let's say lowercase letters, I'm going to repeat those 8 times. So I'm not yet doing what we just proposed on the survey, but I'm instead going to go ahead and print out the result of trying, quite simply, all possible letter-based passwords that are 8 characters long. Now let me go ahead and run this program, and now you'll see flying on the screen not digits, not English words, but passwords that are 8 characters long combining random letters of the alphabet. And you'll see my program is still running. Even if it's a little blurry on your screen, the only takeaway here is just this is taking a long, long, long time. And notice, in fact, that I'm still at the AAA words. And you know what? I can refine this a little bit. If you're curious as to how you can generate all possible passwords now, let me go ahead and choose not lowercase letters, but all possible ASCII letters, all possible digits, and all possible punctuation. Now I'm going to go ahead and combine these. Instead of just combining ASCII lowercase, I'm going to combine ASCII letters plus digits plus punctuation. And I'm going to repeat it, let's just say 4 times, right? Because 4 is more convenient to the human than 8. So let me go ahead now and try this. And now you'll see a whole bunch of cryptic stuff flying across the screen. But this time I'm using letters and numbers. And so even this is going to take a little while. And it's going to take even longer if I change it to 8 characters, let alone 10 or more. So I'm just going to let this keep flying by my screen as we do a little bit of summary here now. If I go back to our estimate of just how secure this is. How secure might, for instance, an 8-character alphanumeric passcode be, such as one we might generate with code? Well, we don't need to poll everyone here. I'll do the math for us. 62 times 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 62 is going to give us this many possibilities, 218 trillion possibilities here. And so that begins to hint at just how secure a system is. So if someone asks you, is your laptop or phone or desktop secure? You can say yes or no instinctively, but if you can actually kind of bolster that argument by making a more quantitative argument, you can say that my password is more secure than yours. Why? Well, yours is only 4 digits. And I know there's only 10,000 possible passwords that are 4 digits. That's not going to take a hacker very long to try all possible values and brute force them. By contrast, though, if you are smarter about this, and you, for instance, are using 8 characters that can be alphanumeric, so letters and numbers, your password is going to be one of 218 trillion possibilities. And just imagine how much longer the hacker is going to have to run their code again and again and again in some loop, trying to just guess what your password is. Now, to be fair, they could get lucky, and maybe your password is foolishly A, or maybe all zeros. So you probably don't want to do that. You do want it to be a random assortment potentially. But of course, the bigger it is, the longer it is, the more complex it is, the harder it's going to be for the adversary to brute force their way in. Now, just for fun, how else might the adversary brute force things? Well, we're going to go ahead and share a short video here that shows you how, using a little robotic device, you can even try to hack into someone's phone, even if you don't have a USB cable or the like. So on your screen here, you should see a silly little robot whose purpose in life is just to move a virtual finger up and down in order to try to hack into someone's phone here. So this can even be automated in a physical sense. Smarter, of course, would be to get like a USB cable, plug it into your Android phone or iPhone, and instead just do it via software instead. All right, so this seems worrisome. A question now for the group. If it's clearly easy for a hacker to write code or, heck, invent a robot that tries to brute force their way into your account by trying all possible numbers, all possible words, all possible combinations of letters and numbers and punctuation, what could our defense be against this? Otherwise, it seems a little scary if all of our accounts are this vulnerable. What would be a defense against this kind of attack? Let's take a show of some hands and call on someone here. What would be a defense against this kind of attack? Luis, where are you from, and what do you think?
Luis from Phoenix, Arizona. I was thinking about I know some Android phones, you can do like a pattern, or the newer phones, iPhone, you can use your fingerprint or your face recognition.
Really good. So you could do a pattern, which is going to be a little harder, and it's for a computer to generate or guess. You could use biometrics, so to speak. So fingerprints, maybe your face or your eyes or the distance between your fingers or any number of other mechanisms. I like that. So other thoughts here. Thank you, Luis. Other thoughts on how you might secure your device nonetheless, even though hackers can clearly use brute force. Let's see, who to call on here next. How about moving on to, give us a moment for the screen to change. Okay, Musaffar, is it? Where are you from, and what do you think?
It's Muzaffar, actually. I am from Turkey. It's so nice to be here. So I think about something like giving a timeout if the user inputs like 5 wrong digits or something.
Really
it gives you a timeout.
And what do you mean by timeout exactly?
Like you can type in another password in 10 seconds and it can multiply when you try harder.
Yeah, that's a really good one too. And in fact, I have a screenshot of this if you've never done this to yourself. So for instance, here's a screenshot of an iPhone that shows the screen as being disabled. But why is it disabled? Well, this is what happens on a typical iPhone if you try typing your password in incorrectly too many times. You had maybe 3 guesses, maybe 5 or 10, but some relatively small number of guesses after which the phone is going to lock you out. And I like this approach too because it slows down the adversary. It doesn't fundamentally stop them from getting into the phone, but it makes it more expensive for the adversary to get in. And indeed, that's the right way to think about security. There's really no such thing as secure per se, or 100% secure. That's just naive to think that anything is that secure, because there's gonna be somehow a way in, especially if the adversary is determined enough, has enough time on their hands, or has enough money with which to attack your device or your account. But if you slowed the adversary down, that would seem to be advantageous because one, if you slow them down so much that they just lose interest, that's great. You're effectively secure because they're going to go try and hack into someone else's phone that doesn't have that kind of feature. Android, fortunately, has this same thing. It varies by flavor of Android, but on an Android phone, if you try your password too many times, what you see is something like this: too many attempts, try again later. So Android doesn't even commit to how many minutes or hours you're locked out. It just tells you try again later. So there's always a price paid, though, when it comes to security, too, even for the good guys, so to speak. You and I, who are trying to keep the hackers out, we can't just enable these features without paying some price. Now, maybe it's monetary, money, or maybe it's really just usability. Any thoughts here on what price we are paying, or equivalently, what is the downside of enabling a feature like this, where there's these delays or timeouts if you mistype your password too many times? Who can we call on for this one? Let's see. What is the downside of this? Hanson, where are you from and what do you think?
Hello, this is Hanson from Shanghai, China. I believe there's one disadvantage is you will lose all your data if you finally cannot unlock your iPhone, right?
Absolutely.
All your data will lost if you don't have something like iCloud backup or many backup from your laptop.
Yeah, absolutely. Suppose it is you who's just forgotten your password. Maybe you don't use the device that often, or maybe you got confused. You could lock yourself out of your phone. And in the worst case, if you never remember the password, you might literally have lost all of your data. You can certainly wipe the whole thing, that is, erase it and start fresh. But if you don't have a backup somewhere on your laptop or desktop, or maybe in the cloud somewhere, you might very well lose your data. And worse, honestly, it's just annoying. I mean, anyone here by a show of physical hands, no need to raise a blue hand, have you ever locked yourself out of your own phone? So there's no hackers in the story. It's just you being a little too groggy or a little too confused. I mean, it's the most infuriating thing when you lock yourself out, whether it's your face or your fingerprint or your keystrokes. But this is a good thing in some sense because it keeps the adversaries out. But what Apple does, and what Android probably does too, is the delay increases. So if you mistype your password a few times, okay, no big deal. You have to wait a minute to try again. If you do it again, then you have to wait like 5 minutes. The next time, maybe 10 minutes. The next time, maybe an hour. And there was a funny screenshot on the internet a few months back where someone was reporting that his iPhone had locked himself out for like some number of years because of this algorithm. So you can sort of overcorrect certainly too, but this might be one defense. But another defense against hackers when it comes to your devices and the passwords that you have on with them, the term of art here would be two-factor authentication. And in fact, we described a few of these already. Two-factor might refer to biometrics like your fingerprints or your eyes or your face or some other measure. But two-factor authentication also takes other forms. Those of you who've used two-factor authentication, would someone mind volunteering a definition of what it is or how they use it? Let's see. Let's call on someone else here for this one. Malika, is it?
This is Malaika from
Malika. Sorry, where are you from?
From Pakistan, Karachi, Pakistan.
Okay, nice to meet. What do you think here?
Yeah, so basically what happens in Google sometimes is that you can ask for the, I think, the two-factor authentication option. So what they do is that they ask for perhaps your best friend's name and you enter that in, and then later on when you're signing in and there's like a problem, or when you're joining in from like an other device, they can ask you, okay, so you're putting in this password and what's your best friend's name? And there are other questions like this as well. For example, what's your favorite place to be, or what do you like to eat? So I've experienced those sometimes, and I've also activated that option for myself, you know, because I feel that it's safer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when you enter this information, sometimes it's unique. So like, for example, if I'm putting in my best friend's name, there can be about 1 million different names for my best friend, right? So yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, really well said. And so if these features are available to you, absolutely consider turning them on. But let's try to consider now just how secure this approach is, where you're asked not just for your username and your password like normal, but you're also asked a third or fourth question like you've proposed, like your best friend, what do you like to eat, or any such question. Technically speaking, most people wouldn't consider those types of questions a second factor, so to speak. It's very common, and it's better than nothing, certainly. But generally, two-factor authentication refers to something a little different. The worry I have with your approach, for instance, your best friend's name or things you like to eat or so forth, you know, you say there could be a billion people who you're friends with, but you know what? If I go on Facebook or Instagram or some social network, I bet I can narrow down the candidates for your best friend to just a few dozen or a few hundred people. And at that point, maybe I can try brute force. Try one name, try another name, and so forth. And unfortunately, too, that information can leak out. You can too often Google someone and find out information about them. And heck, you could go on Instagram and see how often you eat pizza, for instance, just based on the photos. So it's a little risky because that information can be gleaned from a lot of sources. So what other approaches have folks seen? So that approach is good, but I think we can do better. Let's see if we can call on someone else for another approach to two-factor authentication. Omama, where are you from, and what do you think?
I am from Saudi Arabia, and it is like giving another device like mobile phone or another laptop that when you sign in from one laptop, it asks for approval from that other device that you have. Like if you have the phone, it will ask, are you accessing this on this location? It gives you everything and it asks for approval. So I use that.
Good, really well said. So that too is an option, and it's arguably stronger than the first. So absolutely, almost anything is better than just a username and password. And so if you can enable additional questions, definitely use that. Thankfully, a lot of tools these days, a lot of websites and applications and devices also support true second factors, as Mama is describing here, which is generally another device, a second device, whereas the first thing that you're using to authenticate is something you know, like a password, whether it's numeric or alphabetical or the like. The second factor, ideally, is something you have. Because if the second factor is fundamentally different from the first factor, it's going to be a lot harder for someone to just Google you or look at it in social media or guess the answer to those additional questions. They're going to have most likely physical proximity to you. And so therefore, the number of attackers or hackers that you are vulnerable to becomes people with physical access to you. So maybe that's still a little disconcerting, but it's far fewer people than just any hacker on the internet. And so if you have a Gmail account, for instance, this is actually an available feature these days. So I've just put up a screenshot of what it looks like if you enable two-factor authentication, otherwise known here as two-step verification, but same thing. And you'll see that what's being asked here by Google is for a 6-digit code that was sent to someone like Omama on her iPhone or Android device, or just some second device that hopefully no one else in the world has access to. It's okay in this case if the code isn't terribly long, because these codes are usually temporary. You can only use them once. It's not something you have to memorize or use again and again. And it's better than just a password alone because these numbers change over time. So as a takeaway for today, if any of your accounts that you care about, maybe it's personal, maybe it's financial, maybe it's professional, do consider enabling two-factor authentication where a second device is used, your phone or even one of those key fobs you might carry around on your keychain, because it just narrows the scope of the threats that your account might be vulnerable to. But what else could we do when it comes to protecting ourselves? Well, by a show of maybe physical hands only, you can just raise your hand on the screen. How many of you use a different password for every account that you have? Okay, not seeing many hands at all. So I can infer from that that there might be people reusing passwords in some place. And unfortunately, this is a bad security practice too. It's very reasonable that you might want to use the same password again and again on different websites because you can remember it. It's easier. And my God, it's going to be impossible to come up with 10, 20, 100 different passwords if you have 10 or 20 or 100 different accounts. So we tend to use, as humans, the same password again and again. The problem with this, though, is that it exposes you to more risk. If I could call on someone for this, why is it bad to reuse the same password on multiple websites or multiple applications? What is the threat there, even though it's a very understandable tendency that we humans have? Why is this bad? Tony, what do you think?
Because if they actually brute force or find out one of your passwords, all of your accounts are exposed and you're basically off the grid.
Yeah, exactly. If one website or one app is hacked and you are compromised because your password leaks out and someone posts it on the internet somewhere for other hackers to download, well, you know what? They don't have to try to brute force their way into your other accounts. They don't necessarily have to write code. They can just literally try the same password that you used on the account that was hacked on other websites or apps as well. So if Tony happens to be using the same password everywhere, even if just one of those websites is hacked, if the hacker finds out what Tony's password is on one website, they might just assume with reasonable probability that he's unfortunately using the same password elsewhere, and boom, they don't even have to hack into the account. They just have to log into the account with that exact same password. So what might a solution here be? So there exist tools, software programs called password managers. A password manager is a piece of software you can download either for free or by paying for commercial software that stores all of your passwords for you, all of your usernames, all of your passwords, and it remembers what website or application your password is used for. You could, of course, do the same thing by just using Post-it notes on your monitor. Don't do that. You could, of course, do this with like a Microsoft Word document or a Google Doc where you just list out all of your usernames and passwords. Don't do that. What a password manager does is something similar in spirit, but it encrypts all of that information. That is, it scrambles it. So even if someone steals your laptop or phone, hopefully they should not be able to access any of those usernames and passwords. And a password manager just requires that you choose one really good, so hopefully really long and really complicated password as your so-called master password that protects all of the others. So when you launch your password manager program on your Mac or PC or your phone, you have to type in your master password once, but then you can go ahead and select your username and password for any other website or application. The upside here is the encryption, the scrambling of that information, and the fact that you can hopefully, as a human, remember one really big complicated password much, much better than you can remember dozens or hundreds of passwords for each website and app. In fact, what these password managers do for you too is they'll generate good passwords for you. So when you register for a website for the first time, you can just input a random password thanks to your password manager that is very unlikely to be guessed by some hacker, and you, the human, don't have to remember it because the password manager will remember it for you. So to this day, I don't even know most of my passwords because I do use password managers and I let my tool remember it for me. But again, there's always a trade-off, right? Nothing I'm proposing today comes without costs or downsides. So by a show of hands here, who can identify a problem or a downside, a cost of using a password manager? Any thoughts here? Let's see, who to call on here? We'll try to bounce around among the blue hands. Kanchan, is it? Where are you from? And how do you pronounce your name?
Hi, my name is Kanchan and I'm from India. And the downside for that may be that if your laptop is maybe happens something to your laptop, then how can the password manager will be, I guess, backed up? If there is no backup of the password manager and your laptop is something damaged or something.
I agree. Indeed, if I don't know most of my passwords these days because they're so big and long and complicated that I'm trusting my password manager to remember them, what if I lose my laptop or lose my phone on which my password manager is installed? My God, I don't know any of my accounts now, so I can't really get into anything. So that's certainly a downside in this case. Other thoughts on downsides of using a password manager so that you don't necessarily rush into using one of these pieces of software? Navina, let's go to you. Navina, where are you from and what do you think? Oh, still muted. Yes.
From Malaysia.
Malaysia, nice to meet you. What do you think?
I think the software, the password manager that you use could also be breached. So there's no guarantee that your passwords will be safe.
Absolutely. So someone could guess or figure out your master password, especially if you chose a bad one. Or the software, frankly, might just be buggy. Maybe it gets hacked somehow, or maybe the server on which their passwords are being stored, if any, is itself hacked. Now, hopefully, encryption helps us mitigate some of that. But again, you're sort of putting all of your eggs in one basket, so to speak, to use an English cliche, whereby if your master password is hacked or really your password manager is hacked, either deliberately by a hacker or because the company or the software developer who wrote the program wrote buggy software, well, then you're going to be out of luck because now all of your passwords are compromised. So again, it's not necessarily clear cut. And I think to the first point, too, of what if you lose the device, you probably don't want to have a backup of your password manager password somewhere. But again, you don't want to print it out and leave it on your desk or a Post-it note. You probably want to print it out and put it in a physical safe or a vault or something that's really hard for someone else to get into. But again, all you're doing is making it harder or more time consuming for the adversary to find their way in. So encryption I keep mentioning, and if you're not familiar, in CS50 itself, do we explore this topic of encryption and do you write code to encrypt information? But again, encryption is just this art of scrambling information, and it does tend to help us solve these kinds of problems. And in fact, it's used all over the place, and in fact, on the web that you and I use every day, presumably, you probably have noticed over time that more and more URLs start with HTTPS instead of HTTP. The S implies secure, and indeed, any website that's using a URL that starts with HTTPS is using encryption so that the data going from you to that website is encrypted. So even if there is some hacker listening in on your Wi-Fi traffic nearby or with physical access to the internet cables connecting you to that website, they can't see what's inside of the data that you're sending back and forth because it's encrypted. So let's consider then examples of where encryption might be compelling. So for instance, end-to-end encryption is a feature offered by certain tools. WhatsApp, for instance, and Signal and other messaging tools use end-to-end encryption. And end-to-end encryption is an even stronger feature to have. What end-to-end encryption means is that the data is scrambled or encrypted between you and the person you're communicating with. So if I were to send Brian a message on WhatsApp and we're using end-to-end encryption, even though technically WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and even though WhatsApp is therefore sending my message through Facebook servers, end-to-end encryption means that Facebook cannot see my message to Brian. Only Brian can decrypt, that is, descramble the message I've sent him. HTTPS, by contrast, only encrypts your connection between you and the server. So for instance, you and Facebook.com, when using Facebook, the website, that's using HTTPS, but Facebook absolutely sees everything you do and type in that format. If you're using something like WhatsApp or Signal or other more secure protocols that support end-to-end encryption, that means that it's scrambled all the way to the other person. And so this too is a feature to look for and to trust in, because a lot of technologies like SMS or text messages are not encrypted, but things like iMessage on Apple phone devices or WhatsApp or the like do use end-to-end encryption. And a tool got in trouble recently for claiming in their website that they use end-to-end encryption. So this is Zoom's logo, and we're of course using Zoom right now. And they took some heat in recent months for a lot of security concerns, one of which was that they were claiming in some marketing literature on their website to support end-to-end encryption. What they meant, apparently, was that they essentially support this, encryption between you and their servers. They did not mean between you and me, or you and Brian, or Brian and me. That's a different property. That's a stronger security feature, and it tends to be a little harder to implement or a little more expensive computationally because more scrambling needs to be done. So fortunately, Zoom addressed this issue, removed the language, and they actually recently bought a third-party company that specializes in end-to-end encryption. But Zoom has made other mistakes recently, and they've gotten a lot of flack. But is all of that flack justified? Indeed, we're 600 plus of us are currently using Zoom now, and yet I keep hearing that Zoom is secure. Are you and I, all of us, a bunch of dummies for even using Zoom? Well, let's see what we mean by whether Zoom is secure or not. Let's ask one final poll question here. Brian, if you wouldn't mind asking folks, is Zoom secure? And gosh, I hope so, because we're all, again, using it right now. So we shall see what people think here. We got 50% of the votes in. Let's give folks a little more time. Up to 75% of the votes, 80%. All right, Brian, let's take a look at the results. All right, so 18% of you said yes, 41% of you said no, and 41% of you said unsure. So the 41% of you said no. Frankly, I'm wondering why you're even here right now, but this would seem to be a very poor choice. But let's dive into what it means for something like Zoom to be secure or not. And let me point out one of the details that most folks latched onto early on. So this, for instance, on my screen here is a sample URL via which you can join a meeting. This is a fake URL right now. That's not a real meeting ID. But this kind of URL is insecure in some sense. But what do we mean by that? Why are Zoom's meeting IDs, the numeric number you type in, or the URL version of that, where the number is embedded in the URL, in what sense are those insecure? What does someone think here? Let's see. Let's call on someone for an answer to this. Why is this insecure? How about over to Lucas? Where are you from and why insecure?
I'm from Argentina. Thank you for letting me be in this class. I think the reason I think it is insecure is because there was a case here in my country. A university was giving a class, sort of like this one. Someone somehow got access to that class and started streaming content that was not appropriate at all. So I think the reason this person got access to this meeting was because there is a pattern to generate the link, the address to the meeting. I'm not that well informed about how that works, but it has been an issue since 2019 with Max, as I think. And because of the COVID situation, now everyone uses it, but a lot of people are unsure. Between those are me, but it was the only way to get into this class. That's the reason I'm using Zoom, but with measurements.
Quite fair. Indeed, and we are comfortable, Brian and I and CS50's team, in using Zoom, and that's for a reason, for instance. So I absolutely agree that this URL here follows a certain format. It's not that hard to guess. And honestly, even though this happens to be a sample fake meeting ID, certainly if meeting IDs are numeric, 10-digit values, it's not that hard, we've already seen, to write code that generates all possible numeric meeting IDs and just try them. You could write code that doesn't just print them, but tries to connect to Zoom again and again and again in that same for loop. And eventually, you're going to find a meeting that you can get into. It would be like walking through a neighborhood and just trying everyone's doorknob until you can finally get in. Now, some people, fortunately, might have a password. And Zoom recently made it the default to have people use passwords as well, which makes it harder for someone to brute force their way into a meeting. Why? Well, now they have to guess or figure out not only the meeting ID, but also the password. And so this longer URL format represents a URL that contains both. But of course, this too does not really keep any hackers out. Why? Well, there's nothing stopping any of us from pasting this URL that has the meeting ID and the password embedded in it on the internet, or emailing it to a friend, or texting it to someone, or tweeting it. But the catch is that these are actually arguably features, right? When you joined this meeting today, either you typed in a relatively short numeric code followed by a password, or you honestly probably just clicked a link in an email. And that was probably relatively easy, relatively painless, and it didn't really annoy you or get in the way. It was a good user experience. Can you imagine, by contrast, if Zoom used not numeric meeting IDs, but really long sequences of letters and numbers and punctuation, and passwords had to be really long and complicated? I mean, honestly, none of us would ever use Zoom or log into these meetings because it'd be so darn annoying just to use the software. And so at least when it comes to URLs like this, it wasn't that Zoom was fundamentally insecure. It was that this was a feature that was convenient for a lot of users early on, but the more attention Zoom got and the more people started using it and the more hackers took an interest in it, it became all the more obvious that, yes, this is convenient, but is this really as easy as we want to make it for people to get into our meetings? And so long story short, Zoom has long had the ability to have passwords. They have long had the ability to restrict access to people who are logged in, but a lot of us just didn't have those features enabled. Why? Because we never had someone Zoom bomb us or join our room. The threat is still there. If you had emailed the link you received via email today, any of your friends could have gotten into this meeting on their own. That's okay, of course, because we were allowing anyone on the internet to participate. But I would encourage folks to consider the nuances of security. Just because the URLs are guessable doesn't mean it's necessarily bad design. It depends on what you're prioritizing, user experience or security. Now, to be fair, Zoom has made some security mistakes. They, for instance, a year ago took a lot of heat, rightfully so, because they were sort of semi-secretly installing a web server on Mac users' computers, and that web server was vulnerable to attack. So they and Apple finally intervened and removed that. That was a bad choice. They very questionably, even now when you install Zoom, you see a pop-up window that says, system needs your approval to install the software. It's not the system, it's Zoom that needs your approval. So there's a bit of misleading there. So they absolutely deserve some of the heat they talk, but I would encourage folks, again, when you're asked questions like, is something secure or not, honestly, you should never answer in terms of yes or no, most likely, although no might be okay. But yes is never going to be the case. The better question would be, how secure is Zoom? And why is it vulnerable to attack or certain types of attack too? So Brian and I and CS50's team have been very comfortable using Zoom for these purposes and classes more generally. We do always add passwords, but we do use the convenient URLs. And it's just a trade-off. Something could go wrong, absolutely. But do we really want to make it hard for students to attend class? Probably not. So security is all about finding that balance sometimes. Now, what are other measures you might take? And as we conclude here today, so automatic updates is a feature of your phone or your Mac or your PC these days that you can turn on that will just make sure your software is automatically updated. So when there are vulnerabilities in software like Zoom, hopefully you get them automatically. There too, there's a downside. What if Zoom makes a mistake? What if Apple or Microsoft or Google makes a mistake and the update they push to your device automatically is buggy? In the worst case, even without you doing anything, your device might break overnight. It might get bricked just because someone pushed an update to your phone and it was itself buggy. So there too, automatic updates, even though it feels like a good thing, keep my software up to date always, might backfire. And so it's worth considering that. What else might you do? Encryption is generally a good thing, and PCs and Macs and phones these days also support what's called full disk encryption. This means that if you enable this feature by default, all of the data on your phone or your laptop will be encrypted. That is scrambled by default and protected by your password. Now, hopefully your password, again, is not going to be as simple as 4 numeric digits. Hopefully it's going to be longer and more complicated, because otherwise it doesn't matter what's encrypted if it's that easy to get in. But this would be another feature to look into, enabling on your device so that you can at least, if your phone or laptop or computer is stolen, trust that the data itself is probably going to remain secure. And there's many other techniques you can do. And in fact, this URL on the screen will lead you to a landing page on edX where there's a bunch of CS50's courses taught by myself and Brian and some colleagues where we do touch on other matters of security as well. But for today's purposes, we hope you've learned a little something about password security, a little something about Zoom, a little something about password managers and the like. It's been so nice to see everyone here online. We like to end these classes and office hours always with a group photo of sorts. And we typically invite folks, if you would like, to wave and or smile or make some face goodbye.